I guess everyone who's worked on their own fantasy universe has at least once thought, maybe I should try creating my own language. Every fantasy lover has probably asked themselves, how do they even build a whole language system? Like Tolkien set a high standard for the fantasy genre, crafting a living, breathing universe, not only with detailed rules and a rich lore, but also with a full family of Elvish languages as well as Mannish, Dwarfish, and of course the Black speech. While Tolkien is probably the most famous example of a writer who created languages, he's far from the only one. George Martin, for instance, developed the Dothraki. If you're into more classical examples, there is Anthony Burgess with the Natsat slang, or Clockwork Orange, a fusion of Russian and London street slang, or George Orwell's Newspeak in 1984. When we talk about language, we have to remember that it evolves constantly. Language can't exist without people speaking it. Some words emerge, others fade away. It's even said that Shakespeare coined over 1,700 new words in English. So how do we deal with something that's actually alive? But before we start, greeting stranger. My name is Katie, I'm a writer and a narrative game designer. So here we talk about fantasy, books, games, and well, apparently languages too. So it's worth mentioning I'm also a linguist, or at least that's what my bachelor's degree says. So let's start. So what is language? From the very beginning of our lives, we are surrounded by language. We gradually learn to understand it and then to use it to communicate. But we rarely stop to ask, where did language come from? Why do we call a chair, not a cat? Who decided that? According to the Cambridge Dictionary, language is a system of communication consisting of sounds, words, and grammar. Even if that definition still feels a bit abstract, there is one key idea to hold on. Language is a system, and like any system, it has its own logic and internal structure. Another important point, there is a big difference between natural and constructed languages. Natural languages evolve slowly over time, shaped by people, culture, and history. Constructed languages, or conlangs, are made intentionally, like Esperanto, for example. They don't evolve naturally, and they are often designed with a specific goal in mind. Whether it's ease of learning, world building, constructed languages often feature simplified grammar, limited vocabulary, or built-in rules that reflect their purpose. But language is more than just words and sounds. It encodes culture, reflects worldview, and captures human experience. What do real-world linguists say that can help fantasy world builders? In this section, I'll introduce you two of the most influential theories from modern linguists and philosophy. These approaches can help you shape the core concept of your fantasy language and understand how language connects to culture, thought, and world building. Let's start with one of the most famous and most debated theories, linguistic relativity, also known as Saussure-Whorf hypothesis. And disclaimer, this theory is controversial, and here we are not going to argue whether it's right or wrong. Instead, we'll explore how it can be useful in creative works. So, in simple terms, this theory suggests that the language we speak influences the way we think. It proposes that language doesn't just help us express thoughts, it actually shapes them. That's a bold claim, and most modern linguists now believe that language doesn't define what we think, but rather how we think. Still, many writers and creators have used this idea powerfully in fiction. For example, in Ayn Rand's Anthem, a collectivist society eliminates the word I, removing the very concept of individuality from the language, and by extension, from thought. In George Orwell's 1984, the authoritarian regime invents Newspeak, a simplified language designed to reduce the ability to think critically. Words like freedom or justice are removed or altered, limiting the speaker's mental tools. How can you apply this to your fantasy language? Linguistic relativity lets you design a language that reflects and enforces cultural values. A culture with no concept of possession might have no possessive pronouns at all. In the inhabitants of your world see time as non-linear, maybe the language doesn't distinguish between past and future. A genderless society might use neutral pronouns or none at all. By designing grammar and vocabulary around what can and cannot be expressed, You build a language that mirrors the worldview of its speakers. Now let's talk about Ferdinand de Saussure, a foundational figure in modern linguistics. Saussure defined language as a system of science, meaning, he said, comes not from any inherent property of a word but from its relationship to other words in the system. He made a key distinction between language, the abstract system of language, like rules, grammar, structure, and parole, individual use of speech, how people actually talk. He also introduced the idea that every linguistic sign has two parts: signifier, the actual word or sound like tree, and signified, the concept of the idea behind it. The crucial takeaway: the connection between a word and its meaning is arbitrary. There is no natural reason why we call tree a tree. In French it's arbre, in Japanese it's ki. The sound itself doesn't matter, it only has a meaning because a community agrees on it. So how can this be helpful for your fantasy world building? Invent any words you want. You don't need to overthink the logic of every syllable. If sky is virile in your world, that's valid as long as it's consistent. So create layered cultural meaning. Some words can carry emotional or symbolic weight. A hero's name might literally mean hope, or the name of a city might reflect its spiritual beliefs. Play with multiple meanings. One word might have many interpretations depending on context, or different words might describe the same concept, each with its own nuance, like house and home, for example. Inventing a new language system is never easy. It takes time, focus, and a lot of effort, so before diving into it, ask yourself, is this really necessary for my book? In most of the cases, the answer is no. You might only need a few flavor words, some phrases for exposition or unique city names, but rarely an entire language system. And remember, language is just one part of world building. It shouldn't turn into a full-time job. Writing your story is what truly matters. But if you do feel that language is an essential part of your world, then the next session is for you. Multiple times here, we've spoken about the fact that language is a system. We are already familiar with some of its principles, but there is one thing we haven't discussed yet. This system consists of different building blocks. These blocks are called components of the language, and they help us to understand and communicate effectively. There are 5 of them. Phonology. It is the study of speech structure that includes the patterns of the basic speech units and the rules of their pronunciation. In the context of your language, it means what sounds exist in your language: harsh, flowing, clicks. Is there any logic behind them? Morphology is basically word formation. This is the part you might be interested in the most because it is directly connected with inventing words. So for your language, ask yourself, are the words long or short? What affixes and prefixes can I use and for what? How do you form the plural form? Syntax. It is how we unite separate words and other meaningful units into sentences. For your language, think about this. What is the word order? Is it classical subject, verb, object, or do people there speak like Master Yoda? Semantics refers to the ways in which a language conveys meaning. Like having cold feet doesn't mean that person is called so. Semantics is also the meaning beyond its literal meaning. For your language, think about this. Are there concepts that only exist in your world? Or maybe there are special phrases or idioms that only the native speakers can understand. Pragmatics is the way in which members of the speech community achieve their goals using language. There is difference when you speak to your boss and to your friends, right? Or your day-to-day chatting with friends is much different from the style of your final work. So for your language, think about that. Are there any differences when speaking between friends and referring to somebody who is higher in the hierarchy? Is there any difference between average people speaking and noblemen? Real languages evolve over time. That's a key idea we discussed earlier. If you compare Old English, Middle English, and Modern English, it's clear that significant changes occurred, especially during the transition to Middle English. But what drives these changes? Well, it's always important to understand the context. Why did the language change? If we look at the 10th to 15th century Britain, we can see that various things happened. Scandinavian influence, the Norman conquest, feudalism, the Black Death, and the Wars of the Roses. All these events affected the vocabulary as well. Some words appeared, others became redundant and eventually disappeared. Or let's not dive too deep into history. Remember when you were a child? What slang did you use? I'm pretty sure there are some words that are hardly used nowadays. So why does this matter for our discussion? Because understanding that language reflects its history and context helps us see how constructed languages can also reflect culture, time, and change. This is important for your own language as well. Consider how it might have evolved and what historical influences shaped it. You don't need to invent several historical versions, but thinking about your language's origins and current state can add depth to it. To show intercultural experience in your universe, you can also use loanwords, words that came from one culture to another. The main points your language might reflect are its cultural history, religion, location, government, structure, and so on and so forth. You might be sitting right now with your head collapsing under the weight of all the information we've covered, and the genuine question that really interests all of us: where is it better to start? I would still strongly recommend taking it easy and not diving too deep into linguistics unless you have a strong urge to do so. So start simple. Naming system, for example. Think about the names of cities, artifacts, lands, historical events, whatever is important in your universe. Give them names. And at this point, don't worry too much about every sound. Just try to convey the general meaning. Like Solberg from Latin sol, sun, and berg, city. Maybe in your language, all female names start or end with an O or A, like Aylara or Elena. Will your characters say, "Oh God," or will they say something like, "Oh," in any name of your fantasy god? Is there a concept of hell? Do they say it rains cats and dogs, or maybe it rains frogs and snakes? I'm just making things up. Don't take that example too seriously, please. Use inspiration from existing languages, but blend it creatively. Don't just copy names like Tierra Nova or Silva Forest and add your own spice to it. My example, in my universe of Fuera, there are around 12 different countries and cultures. So far, I haven't had the chance to fully develop each one, so I decided to focus on just two, Merfel and Felmera. While the main events of my books take place in Merfel, Felmera is also mentioned. As these two countries have a long and complicated history of alternating wars and truces, now back to Merfel. For its main culture references, I drew inspiration from late medieval Britain, or at least I tried to incorporate some of its features. So the modern language spoken in Merfel isn't too different from what we speak today, but you can still find traces of an old northern dialect called Ka, which was used in the northern regions during the first dynasty of the Menclades. In the dialect, Ka is suffix added to nouns. It serves different functions, but when used in geographical names, it typically refers to proximity, essentially meaning at or near. For example, there is a large river called Lotia, and the village on its shore is named Lotka. Similarly, in the center of the country, there is a small river called Gotia, where a nearby village is called Gotka. There is also an island called Veka, which is separated from the rest of the world by a magical barrier. Originally used as Merfel's prison, the island retains a stronger connection to the old Ka dialect, and the name Veka itself came from the name of the mountain Ve, combined with the suffix Ka. These are examples of older settlements. In contrast, more modern names tend to be much more simple and are based on the straightforward words like the village of Crayfish or the town of Eastgate. So, to sum it all up, creating a language for your world can be an incredibly rewarding experience, but it doesn't have to be overwhelming. You don't need to be a professional linguist or build an entire dictionary to make your world feel real. Start with what matters most to your story. A few meaningful names, cultural expressions, or hints of an ancient dialect. It all can go a long way in bringing your universe to life. Remember the key takeaways. Language is a system, but you don't have to build the whole system. Culture, history, and worldview are reflected in how people speak. Borrow from real-world languages for inspiration, but shape them to fit your world's unique logic. And above all, keep it fun. Keep it story-driven. World building can be really entertaining, but story always comes first. Without your story and characters in it, your world will not be alive no matter how many volumes of its history you write. And that's it for today. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, leave a comment and tell me what's your favorite world building element. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos on storytelling, writing, and fantasy creation. Until next time, keep building and happy writing.